Hi, my name is Margaret Whitmore, and I shouldn't have come that night. I told myself it was the right thing to do showing up for family, even when they've never truly shown up for me. That's what you do, right? You dress up, you smile, you make polite conversation while silently praying the evening ends without incident. But I walked into the community center that evening with a gift in one hand and dread in the other, and walked out with a stinging cheek, tears I don't remember shedding, and the bitter taste of humiliation that would take days to wash away. It was my younger brother Ethan's big night. The town was giving him a civic award, Outstanding Service to the Community. People adore Ethan. He's the golden boy, a well-respected doctor. Warm smile, charming. The kind of man who never forgets to call the mayor by his first name. And me? I'm Margaret, the spinster sister who works at the local library, the one they only mention when asked, the family's asterisk. The event hall was dressed up in blue and silver streamers, folding chairs in straight rows, buffet tables along the walls with coffee urns and cold mini quiches. It wasn't fancy, but for our small Vermont town, it was something. People were already mingling when I walked in. I hung near the back, close to the bulletin board where photos of past events were pinned with crooked thumbtacks. I clutched my purse tightly and tried to blend in, even though I was probably the only person in the room who had changed outfits 3 times before leaving the house. I'd finally settled on a simple navy dress conservative, a bit snug at the waist but appropriate, I thought. "Margaret," a voice called, cool and clipped. My mother. She appeared beside me like she always did suddenly and with judgment in her eyes. Her hair, as always, was perfectly curled under, pearls around her neck, a pale pink cardigan that screamed harmless, even though I knew better. "I was wondering if you were actually going to show." "I said I would," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Her eyes flicked over my dress. "Well, next time, maybe wear something less tight. It pulls across the stomach when you stand like that." I looked down instinctively. That was the trick. She never raised her voice, just whispered enough to make me second-guess everything about myself. I forced a smile and said, "You look lovely, Mother." She didn't respond, only gave a small nod and disappeared into the crowd. I exhaled. "Just breathe, Margaret." That's when Ethan spotted me. He was surrounded by townspeople smiling like the cover of a local magazine. When he saw me, his expression shifted, just slightly, but enough that I knew what was coming. "Well, well," he said, loud enough for those around to hear. "If it isn't our favorite librarian, surprised you made it out past your bedtime." A few polite chuckles from the people nearby. I gave a tight-lipped smile. "I wouldn't miss your big night," I replied. "Still reading those dusty books all day?" he said, sipping from his glass. "Must be nice, no pressure, no responsibilities." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but kept my voice calm. "I like what I do." "Sure," he said with a smirk. "Everyone loves a good hobby." Then he turned back to his admirers, already forgetting I was there. I stepped away, trying to find a quiet corner. That's when I saw my father, Judge Charles Whitmore, retired. He was seated near the front with a few local officials, shaking hands and telling stories. He caught sight of me, and something in his face hardened. He stood and walked toward me slowly, his cane tapping against the linoleum floor. "What are you doing here?" he asked, no warmth in his voice. "I was invited," I said. "Not by me," he snapped. "This is Ethan's night. You have a habit of making things about yourself." "I haven't said a word," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "You should have stayed home, like you did for your sister's funeral." My breath caught in my throat. Emily, my twin, gone since we were 17, a car accident, a lifetime ago. I had attended the funeral. I had stood in the back, behind the curtain of whispers. But that's not what mattered. What mattered was their version of the story, and in their version, I was the one who survived, and that made me guilty. Before I could respond, before I could gather the words to defend myself, his hand came up. The slap was sharp, sudden, not hard enough to knock me down, but hard enough that people turned. Conversations paused, forks stopped midair. Music from the speakers didn't even seem to know how to go on. And still, no one moved. No one came over. They all just looked away, including my mother. She adjusted her bracelet, including Ethan. He raised his glass. I stood frozen, the sting spreading across my cheek, hot and humiliating. I tasted something metallic in my mouth. Blood? Bitten tongue? I wasn't sure. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked. No, I left. Out the door, into the cool September evening. My heels clicked across the sidewalk like punctuation marks on a sentence I didn't get to finish. I didn't look back. I walked toward my car with trembling hands and blinking eyes. I had come because I wanted to believe they'd changed. Instead, they reminded me exactly who they've always been. And for the first time in years, I realized maybe that wasn't my burden anymore. The ride home was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort. It claws at you. The hum of the tires on the country road was the only sound, but inside my head, voices shouted over one another. My father's words, my mother's expressionless face, Ethan's smirk, my own silence. I should have said something. I should have screamed. I should have demanded someone do something, but I didn't. I never did. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were trembling so hard I could barely turn off the ignition. The porch light flickered above the faded wood steps. Home, but it didn't feel safe tonight. Inside, the old house creaked like it always had. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my purse on the worn armchair by the door, and leaned against the wall. The mirror in the hallway caught my reflection. My cheek was still red, not angry red, just enough that it would turn purple by morning. The kind of mark you can cover with makeup. The kind people will pretend not to see. I turned away. I didn't want to look at her, me, any longer. In the kitchen, I filled a dish towel with ice and pressed it gently to my face. My jaw ached where his hand had connected, but it was the humiliation that pulsed harder than any bruise. I sat at the small kitchen table, the one where I'd eaten dinner alone for years, and just stared at the wall. It wasn't just tonight. It was years of this, of being the problem, of being the invisible one, of being blamed for things that weren't my fault. Emily's death, my choice to stay in town, my single status, my quiet job, my quiet life. I reached for my phone. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't sit in that silence another minute. I scrolled through my contacts, past coworkers, book club friends, people I hadn't spoken to in months, even years. Then I saw her name, Nina Foster. We hadn't talked in over 5 years. Nina and I had been close in college. She had been the loud one, fiery, fearless. I was quieter, the one who edited her papers and loaned her gas money when her car wouldn't start. After graduation, she'd gone to law school. I heard she opened a small practice in Montpellier and was doing quite well. I hesitated only for a moment before pressing call. It rang once, then twice. Then, Margaret? Her voice sounded just like I remembered. Crisp, grounded, a little surprised. Nina, I said, and something in my voice cracked. I didn't know who else to call. There was a pause, but she didn't ask why. She just said, talk to me. And I did. I told her everything. From the moment I walked into the event hall to the slap that stopped the room cold. I told her about my father's words, my mother's eyes, Ethan's cruelty. I didn't censor anything. For once, I didn't downplay the pain. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. Then, do you have ice on your face? Yes. Good, that's step 1. A pause. Step 2, you're going to come to my office tomorrow morning, first thing. I'll be waiting. Nina, I started. but she cut in. "Number you called me for a reason, and I'm not letting this slide. I don't care if he was a judge. I don't care if your brother's a doctor. No one lays a hand on you, not again." I felt my throat tighten. All I could manage was a whispered, "Thank you." After we hung up, I sat still for a long time. I wasn't shaking anymore. It was strange, how someone believing you changes the temperature of a room, but I wasn't done. I scrolled again, this time to a contact I hadn't used in over a decade. Russell Hensley, my old landlord, once a detective with the Burlington Police Department, now retired, still sharp, still no nonsense, still owed me a favor from years ago when I helped his niece get a scholarship. I tapped voicemail. "Hi, Russell, it's Margaret Whitmore. I need a favor, urgent. Call me back when you can." I didn't expect a reply that night, but 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Text message. "You're safe. I'll call at 7 a.m. I'll start digging. Hang tight." 3 sentences, and yet they felt like armor. I wrapped the dish towel tighter around my jaw and headed to the bedroom. The sheets were cold, the room dark, but I didn't feel helpless anymore. Something had shifted. I wasn't looking for revenge, not yet. I wasn't even sure what I wanted, but I knew this much. I wouldn't go quietly again. Not this time. Not ever again. The next morning, my alarm went off at 6:15, but I was already awake. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's hand rising. I heard the silence in that hall. I felt the burning sting on my face. I showered quickly and dressed in jeans and a sweater. Nothing fancy. Something that felt like me. I didn't wear makeup, just oversized sunglasses to cover the swelling. I pulled my hair into a loose bun and stood by the mirror. I didn't look weak. I looked tired, but not weak. I drove downtown slowly, the streets just beginning to stir. Shopkeepers unlocking doors, coffee shops warming up, a jogger crossing Main Street with earbuds in. As I parked outside Nina's office, I saw her car already there. I hesitated for just a moment, then stepped out. The air was crisp. Vermont autumn, my favorite time of year. I climbed the stone steps to her office. When I opened the door, she was already standing there, holding a steaming mug. "Tea," she said, handing it to me. "I remember you never liked coffee." I almost laughed. Almost. She gestured to her office. "Come in. Let's get to work." Nina's office smelled like cedar and lemon polish. Not intimidating, just clean and focused. Like her. She closed the door behind me and walked over to her desk, motioning for me to sit across from her. Her legal pad was already open, pen resting at the top, uncapped and ready. "I want you to start from the beginning," she said gently. "Not just last night. Everything." I sat slowly. The chair was too soft, too comfortable for what I was about to say. "I don't even know where the beginning is," I admitted. "Start where it hurts," she said. "That's usually the right place." I took a long breath, and then I told her. About being 12 and being told my voice was too loud at the dinner table. About being 17 and standing at Emily's funeral with mascara-stained cheeks and my father's voice hissing in my ear that I should have been the one. About birthdays ignored, accomplishments brushed aside, my mother's condescending, "Oh, Margaret," anytime I dared to disagree. I told her how I used to think something was wrong with me, that if I was just quieter, prettier, more agreeable, maybe they'd see me, maybe they'd love me the way they loved Ethan. I spoke for what felt like hours. When I finally stopped, Nina's pen was still untouched. She hadn't written a single word. She didn't need to. She leaned forward, her tone measured but tight. This wasn't just emotional abuse, and what happened last night wasn't an isolated incident. If your father laid hands on you in front of 50 people, I'd bet anything it's not the first time. I said nothing, but my silence was its own confession. Nina nodded slowly. "We're going to do this right, officially. Police report, photos, medical evaluation." She handed me a card, Dr. Carla Jensen. She's a trauma specialist. I trust her. She can document the physical injuries, but also help you begin healing. I stared at the card. Healing, I repeated. The word felt unfamiliar in my mouth, like a language I'd never learned. Then Nina did something unexpected. She reached across the desk and covered my hand with hers. "You've been surviving for decades. I want to help you live." I blinked hard, but I nodded. "I'll go." Before I could say anything else, my phone buzzed. Russell. I picked it up. "Margaret," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "I've got something. You got time to come by?" "Yeah," I said. "I'll be there in 20. Nina stood as I got up. "You'll keep me updated?" "I will," I said. "And Nina?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for listening and for not pitying me." She gave a small, tight smile. "I don't pity you, Margaret. I admire you. Most people would still be pretending nothing happened." Russell lived in a modest house on the edge of town. Same old green truck parked out front, same lopsided porch step he never fixed. It had been at least 10 years since I'd visited him. He opened the door before I could knock. "You look tired," he said, stepping aside. "Thanks," I muttered. "Nice to see you, too." He didn't smile. But that was Russell. His version of warmth was coffee and paperwork. He led me to the kitchen where a steaming mug was already waiting for me on the table. No sugar, one cream, just the way I liked it. I didn't know whether to be comforted or unnerved that he remembered. On the table was a manila folder, thick, sealed. "You said it was urgent," I said, eyeing it. He nodded. "It is." He sat down opposite me, folded his hands. "What I'm about to show you, you sure you're ready for this?" "Not even a little," I said. "But show me anyway." He slid the folder over. Inside, bank statements, photocopies, digital printouts. My eyes scanned the pages. I saw my name, my trust, transfers, withdrawals, reallocations, amounts I didn't recognize, signatures I didn't make. "I had a trust?" I asked, voice faint. He looked at me carefully. "Your grandfather set it up before he passed, for you and Emily, equal shares. But when Emily died, everything rolled into your half." My hands trembled. "I never saw a cent." "No," he said, "you didn't, but someone did." He flipped one document over and pointed at a wire transfer, $42,000, moved from Margaret Whitmore Trust to an LLC account. The name on the transfer, Carrington Health Partners. I stared at it. "That's Ethan's company." Russell gave a slow nod. "There's more. Looks like your father, using his authority as trustee, moved funds over the years, always small enough to avoid flags. But together, it's hundreds of thousands." My mouth went dry. "They used my money," I whispered. "They used your money," Russell confirmed, "to bankroll Ethan's clinic, his campaign for the hospital board, even that award dinner last night." I looked up, vision blurred with heat. "They celebrated him with my money." Russell didn't speak. He just let the words hang there. I turned the last page in the folder and saw an email chain. One line made my skin crawl. "Make sure Ethan shines. Margaret never even checks her account. She's no threat." It was from my father. I pushed the folder away and stood up suddenly. The chair scraped hard against the floor. "This isn't just abuse," I said. "This is fraud. This is theft." Russell looked at me and said nothing, because he agreed. I paced the small kitchen, running a hand through my hair, trying to ground myself. "They stole from me," I whispered, "all these years, and I said thank you for dinner." Russell rose, crossed his arms. "What do you want to do next?" I didn't even have to think. "I'm going to Nina," I said, "and we're going to burn this whole thing down." Later that evening, I sat at my dining room table, my laptop open, folder spread out like war plans. I scanned every document again. Each line item was a wound. Each dollar stolen a lie exposed. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't weak. I was betrayed. And now, I was ready. 2 days after Russell handed me that folder, I got the text message from my mother. "Please come by the house this evening. We need to talk now as a family." No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Just, "We need to talk." It didn't say who would be there, but I knew. I stared at the message for a long time. Nina had already seen the documents. We'd spent the previous afternoon in her office mapping out next steps. Police report, civil case, possible federal charges depending on how deep the financial trail went. She didn't want me to go to the house. "Don't give them the chance to twist this," she warned. "You've got the leverage now. Don't walk into their arena." But I wasn't going because I needed closure. I was going to see how desperate they really were. The Whitmore family home hadn't changed in 30 years. White shutters, green front door, rose bushes lining the walkway like obedient soldiers. It was the kind of house that photographed well, safe, proud, respectable. It was also the house where I learned to hold my breath when footsteps got too loud. I parked at the curb and sat in the car for a moment, watching the warm glow from the windows. It would almost look inviting if you didn't know who lived there. Nina's voice echoed in my mind. "If it feels wrong, you leave. Don't try to fix it. You're not here to save them." I stepped out, shoulders squared. I rang the doorbell only once. My mother opened it, perfectly composed in a pale gray blouse and her pearls. She smiled like we were about to host book club. "Margaret, thank you for coming." I walked past her without responding. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and lavender candles. Like always, clean on the surface, rotten underneath. In the formal living room, my father was seated in his leather chair, one ankle resting over his knee like he was presiding over a courtroom again. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on knees, casual but tense. On the coffee table in front of them, a manila envelope. Thick, too neatly placed. I didn't sit. "You said we needed to talk," I said evenly. "So talk." My father didn't look at me. "Let's not waste time. We understand you're upset, but making a public mess helps no one." Ethan chimed in. "Look, we know emotions were high the other night. Dad lost his temper. It happens. You don't need to ruin the family over it." I laughed. Just once. Short. Dry. "You think this is about a slap?" I said. "That's what you're going with?" Ethan leaned back. "Well, what else could it be about?" I didn't answer. I wanted to see how far they'd go. My mother finally stepped in. "We'd like to resolve this privately, for everyone's sake, including yours." She slid the envelope across the coffee table. I didn't move. "What is it?" "A non-disclosure agreement," she said, "and a financial settlement, a generous one." I stared at her. "You stole from me," I said quietly. "You drained my trust. You used my money to fund Ethan's career. And now you want to buy my silence with whatever's left over?" My father finally looked up. His voice went cold. "Careful, Margaret. This kind of bitterness won't serve you." "You're right," I said. "Bitterness would be me setting fire to this room. What I feel is clarity." Ethan scoffed. "You've always been dramatic." I ignored him. I picked up the envelope, opened it slowly, scanned the first page. NDA, waiver of liability, gag clause, and a check. Low 6 figures, a laughable sum considering what they'd taken and what they were trying to hide. I set the papers back down with a level of calm I didn't know I had. "You think I came here to negotiate," I said softly, "but I didn't. I came to give you a choice." They all looked at me now. I stepped closer, standing between the fireplace and the table, the old family portrait still hanging behind me. "I have evidence," I continued. "Financial records, emails, witnesses, and a lawyer who doesn't blink." My mother flinched, just barely. "I also have a former police detective who's very good at finding things people thought they buried, and I have a voice, one I don't intend to lose again." My father's face tightened. You're bluffing. Am I? I looked at Ethan. Did you brag to your hospital colleagues about building your clinic with family funds? Because someone remembers that. Ethan's face darkened. I turned to my mother. Do you remember telling Aunt Helen at Christmas that Margaret's lucky we let her keep her name on the documents? Because she certainly does. I turned back to my father. And you signed off on every transfer. You left a paper trail so neat, even the IRS could follow it in their sleep. I took a breath. You have 2 days to come clean, to write a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, to return what you stole. Otherwise, Nina files the suit Monday morning, civil, criminal, and with press coverage. Silence. Then my mother said softly, You'll never survive this. And that was the moment I knew I had already won. Because for the first time, she sounded afraid. I leaned in slightly, eyes locked on hers. I've survived far worse, and I did it alone. But now, I'm not alone anymore. I turned and walked toward the door. As I reached the threshold, I looked back one last time. You thought I was weak, that I'd keep my head down forever. You forgot I come from you. I learned silence from the best. But I also learned how dangerous truth can be when you finally stop hiding it. Then I left. The night air hit me like a release. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just walked down the path I'd walked 100 times as a child. Only now I wasn't leaving in shame. I was walking away on my terms. And this time I wasn't just walking out. I was walking toward something. You thought I was weak, that I'd keep my head down forever. You forgot I come from you. I learned silence from the best, but I also learned how dangerous truth can be when you finally stop hiding it. Then I left. The night air hit me like a release. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just walked down the path I'd walked 100 times as a child. Only now I wasn't leaving in shame. I was walking away on my terms. And this time, I wasn't just walking out. I was walking toward something. The next morning, I met Nina and Russell at the corner booth of the Maple and Oak Diner, the kind of place where the coffee was bottomless and the waitresses called you Hun. Nina had a leather briefcase by her side, her hair pulled into a tight bun. Russell had his usual black notebook and a look in his eye that said he hadn't slept much. I slid into the booth, wrapping my hands around the warm mug they'd ordered for me. Nina leaned in. How'd it go? They offered me hush money, I said flatly. Called it a settlement. Russell raised an eyebrow. You take it? I looked at him. Would I be here if I did? He smiled faintly. Didn't think so. I handed Nina a copy of the NDA and the check they'd offered. She skimmed the documents quickly, then tucked them into a folder labeled Leverage, Not Signed. We'll hold on to this, she said. It shows intent. That's useful in court. Russell slid a USB drive across the table. This, he said, is more than useful. I picked it up. What is it? He sat back. Security footage. From the event hall. One of the servers, young guy, part-time tech at the community center, recognized you when the news about the slap started buzzing online. He came forward voluntarily. Didn't want a dime. I stared at the small silver stick in my hand. It's on video? Russell nodded. Start to finish. Your father slapping you, the reaction from the crowd, or lack of one, and your exit. Crystal clear. Nina blinked. Why didn't they destroy the footage? They thought they controlled the narrative, I said quietly. Same as always. Russell leaned forward. Margaret, this changes everything. We're not just building a civil case anymore. This is a turning point. I slipped the USB into my purse, suddenly aware of its weight. What do we do with it? Nina looked at me, eyes steady. That depends. Are you ready for people to know the full story? I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window. Across the street, a father was holding his daughter's hand, walking her into the bakery. She was maybe 7, wearing a purple backpack and boots that lit up when she walked. She reminded me of Emily. I think, I said finally, I'm more ready than I've ever been. That afternoon, we set up in Nina's office. She connected the USB to her laptop and projected it onto the wall. The footage began, grainy but clear. There I was, standing stiff near the back of the hall, my dress pulled a little across the waist, just like my mother had said. I looked uncomfortable, alone. The camera caught everything. My father's approach, his words, his hand, the slap. My body jolted to the side. My hand went to my cheek. People looked and looked away. I watched myself turn and walk out, shoulders squared, pain barely contained. When the screen faded to black, no one spoke. Nina finally said, "It's clean. It's irrefutable." Russell added, "There's no audio, but we can support the footage with your written statement and eyewitness accounts. That server kid's already willing to testify." I stood there watching the blank wall. It was surreal, seeing myself from the outside. How many times had I questioned if I was overreacting? How many times had I gaslit myself because no one else seemed to care? Now it was all there, on a screen, for anyone to see. "I want to release it," I said. Nina turned. "To the press?" "Number it first, just to a few people, quietly. People in town who know them, who respect them." Russell nodded slowly. "You want to control the spread. Make it undeniable before they can spin it." "Exactly." Nina tapped her pen thoughtfully. "I have a friend who runs the town council newsletter. It's digital but heavily followed. No ads, no gossip, just facts." "Perfect," I said. She hesitated. "Once it's out, there's no taking it back." I looked at her. "I don't want it back." Over the next 48 hours, the video made its way across inboxes in town like wildfire, passed hand to hand. No commentary, no edits. Just the truth, played in silence. The town pastor emailed me privately. "I never knew. I'm sorry I didn't speak up when I should have. You have my full support." A former teacher of mine wrote, "You were always the quiet one. I understand why now. Thank you for your courage." But the most surprising message came from Ethan's own colleague at the clinic. "I'm resigning. Effective immediately. I can't work for someone who hides behind charm and money while abusing family." Nina and Russell called it a controlled ripple, the kind that builds momentum before it crashes. The next step was inevitable: media. We scheduled an interview with a regional online paper, not flashy but reputable. Margaret Whitmore, former judge's daughter, speaks out about abuse, fraud, and family silence. I'd never seen my name in bold print before. I wasn't sure how I felt, but I knew it was necessary. On the morning of the interview, I received a voicemail. It was my mother. "Margaret, I hope you're proud of yourself. Your father hasn't left the house in days. The calls won't stop. You've destroyed us." I didn't delete it. I played it twice. Then I saved it. For the record, I wasn't destroying them. I was exposing them. They'd built their world on silence. And now, it was finally cracking. That night, as I sat alone at my kitchen table, I reached into the drawer and pulled out something I hadn't touched in years. A small gold necklace. Emily's. The one my mother had torn off my neck the day of her funeral, saying I didn't deserve to wear it. I had found it years later, tucked away in a box of old scarves. I held it for a moment. Then I clasped it gently around my neck, not as a statement, as a promise, to myself, and to the sister who never got the chance to speak. The courthouse in Addison County wasn't grand, no marble columns or echoing halls, just red brick, 3 stories, a flag that whipped in the wind, and a parking lot that never quite had enough spaces. But that morning, it felt like the center of the world. People stood outside, some with phones, some with notepads, a few with signs. My name had made it into the Burlington Press, the Vermont Ledger, even a segment on local TV. Former judge's daughter breaks silence on abuse and fraud. It didn't feel real, but it was. Nina walked beside me. steady and focused, briefcase in hand. Her calm was my anchor. On my other side, Russell, dressed in a clean jacket, nodding at familiar faces in the crowd. And behind us, a quiet handful of women and men who'd reached out after the story broke. Other survivors, former neighbors, a retired teacher who'd once given me a B+ on an essay about justice. I wasn't alone anymore. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. My father sat at the defendant's table, jaw tight, flanked by 2 attorneys in tailored suits. Ethan was behind him, wearing a somber face that didn't reach his eyes. My mother wasn't there. Maybe she finally realized what shame actually feels like. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and the kind of stare that sliced through performance, took her seat. Nina leaned in and whispered, "You breathe. I'll do the heavy lifting." I nodded. I could do that. Just breathe. The case had technically started with a civil suit, misappropriation of trust funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and defamation. But once the video surfaced, once Russell's investigation was submitted into evidence, and once the anonymous email from a former employee confirmed long-term financial misconduct, things escalated. Now we were looking at possible criminal charges. A full audit of Carrington Health Partners was underway. My father's legal team had tried to dismiss the personal injury portion of the claim, calling it exaggerated and emotional and mutually provoked. But the footage said otherwise. Nina began her opening with quiet force. "This case is not about revenge. It's about responsibility, about what happens when power goes unchecked inside families, when silence is weaponized and dignity is stolen one decision at a time." She laid it all out, the decades of psychological abuse, the financial deception, the public humiliation. She showed bank statements, emails, legal documents, all leading back to one undeniable truth. My family had treated me not as a daughter, but as a liability to manage and a fun to exploit. When they played the video, the room went silent. Even the opposing counsel didn't speak for several moments. The soundless footage filled the screen, my father striking me, the guests frozen in place, the way I stood there, stunned, but not broken, and walked out. When the lights came back on, I didn't feel exposed. I felt strong. The defense tried everything. They claimed the trust transfers were reallocated for the family's benefit, that the slap was an unfortunate moment of generational misunderstanding, that I had an inflated sense of grievance stemming from childhood resentments. Nina dismantled every point, with evidence, with witness statements, with calm precision that made their arguments look like tantrums. And when it was time for me to take the stand, I did. I walked to the front of that courtroom and looked directly at my father. "I was never the difficult one," I said. "I was the quiet one. Because every time I spoke, you told me I was wrong, or dramatic, or selfish. But it wasn't selfish to want to be safe. It wasn't dramatic to be hurt. It was human." I turned to the judge. "And I'm done apologizing for being human." I looked out over the courtroom and saw the pastor, the baker, my high school librarian, and 3 rows behind them, Mrs. Crane, who used to live next door to us, tears in her eyes. They weren't just watching me testify. They were witnessing me reclaim something that had been taken. When the final arguments ended, the judge took a recess. We stepped outside into the cold sunlight. I expected reporters, noise, questions. But what met me was something quieter, warmer. A woman in her 70s stepped forward. I didn't recognize her at first. Then she said, "You probably don't remember me, dear. I was your bus driver in 5th grade." I blinked. "Mrs. Alden?" She nodded, then placed a hand gently over mine. "I saw that bruise on your arm once. Back then. I didn't say anything. I've regretted it ever since." My throat tightened, but I nodded. "Thank you," I whispered. Behind her, someone clapped. Then another. Then 5. 10. The sound rippled through the crowd, not thunderous, but steady, like a heartbeat. Nina touched my elbow. "They see you now." And this time, I let the tears come. The next morning, the judge issued a preliminary ruling. The civil suit would proceed to a full trial. But more importantly, she referred the financial case to the state attorney general's office, citing strong evidence of criminal misappropriation. My father was placed under formal investigation. My brother stepped down from his clinic's board. The community that once stood in silence now whispered a different tune. That night, I sat alone in my living room. The house was quiet, but not hollow. I made tea, curled up in my grandmother's old rocking chair, and pulled out a journal. The first page was blank, but not for long. I began to write, not just about what had happened, but about what comes next. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something new, something with a foundation of truth. And maybe one day someone else, another quiet daughter, another overlooked soul, might read it and know they're not alone. 3 months had passed since the hearing. Winter had loosened its grip on Vermont. The snow was still packed at the sides of the roads, gray and stubborn, but the air smelled different, brighter, like thawing. My house looked the same from the outside, but inside, everything had shifted. Boxes of old memories were gone. No more photo frames of forced smiles. No more dusty certificates my father once made me hang in the hallway. Instead, I had new things. A small bookshelf filled with titles that I loved, not books people gifted me for display. A table by the window where the morning sun touched my cup of tea. A wall painted in soft green, the first color I chose without asking if it fit the family tone. It was home now. Not a place to hide, but a place to breathe. I still worked at the library, but now part-time. The rest of my week, I volunteered with a women's shelter 1 town over. Nina had introduced me. They needed someone to help run a reading group. I ended up staying for far more. Sometimes it was just listening. Sometimes handing someone a cup of cocoa and saying, "You don't owe them another second of your silence." They didn't know my full story, but they knew enough that I had survived something, that I understood. One Thursday, as I was shelving a stack of returned books, I heard someone clear their throat gently behind me. I turned. It was Ethan, dressed neatly, no suit, just jeans and a windbreaker. He held his hands awkwardly in front of him. "Hi," he said. I blinked. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged. "I wanted to return this in person." He held up a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. It was our father's old edition, the one he used to quote constantly, selectively, of course. I took the book without comment. "I read it again," Ethan said quietly, "all the way through this time, not just the parts Dad liked." I didn't say anything. He shifted. "You know?" I didn't know, not all of it. I knew some, but "You benefited from it," I said, not unkindly, "whether you knew or not." He nodded slowly. "You're right." There was a long pause. Then he said, "I resigned from the board. I'm opening a small clinic in Montpelier, independent sliding scale." "That's good," I said. He glanced down. "I'm sorry for what I said, for not stopping him, for being a coward." I looked at him. Really looked. My brother, still standing in the rubble of a family he helped prop up. "I don't hate you," I said. His eyes filled a little. "That might be the worst part." We stood there for another moment. Then he nodded, turned, and walked out. I placed the book gently on the cart and moved on. Some pages you reread. Others you close for good. Later that week, Nina invited me to speak at a community event in Burlington. Not as a victim, she said, not even as a survivor, as someone who fought back. I nearly said no. The idea of standing in front of strangers telling my story again, it exhausted me. But then I remembered how many people hadn't spoken, how many never got the chance. So I said yes. The room was modest, maybe 30 people. Folding chairs, lukewarm coffee in the back, nothing grand. I stood behind a simple podium, no notes, no slideshow, just me. And I told them, not everything, not the whole darkness, just enough light to lead someone else out. And when I finished, I said, they told me I was too sensitive, too emotional, too selfish. But what I was silenced, and now I'm not. And if you're sitting here wondering if your voice matters, let me tell you, it does. Start with a whisper if you have to. Just start. There was no applause at first, just stillness, and then soft clapping. Tears. A woman in the back stood and whispered, "Thank you." That was enough. That was everything. Spring came. Then early summer. And one morning, I found myself on the porch with Russell, sipping coffee like we used to in college. He handed me an envelope. Inside, a check. Part of the restitution from the civil case. The rest was coming in installments, and the criminal case was still pending. "Feels weird," I said, "getting paid back for being stolen from." Russell nodded. "Weird, but right." I looked at him. "You ever wonder if justice is just rebalancing, not revenge?" He smirked. "You used to write bad poetry about stuff like that." I laughed. "Still do." We clinked mugs. "I'm proud of you, Margaret," he said. "Not for fighting, for staying soft. That's the harder thing." I looked out at the sky, streaked with gold and early heat. "I'm not done," I said, "but I'm no longer stuck." And for the first time in years, I believed it. That night, I sat at my writing desk, not journaling this time, but drafting the first chapter of something new, maybe a memoir, maybe fiction, maybe just a long letter to every girl who's ever walked out of a room full of silence and still kept walking. I wrote the title across the top of the page, The Quiet Daughter. And then I began. This isn't a story of revenge. It's about choosing peace without needing an apology. Walking away, not in anger, but with strength and clarity. If you've ever felt overlooked, silenced, or blamed, remember, you don't owe anyone your silence. You have the right to speak. You have the right to heal. Even if it means letting go of family. Healing doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it's just not going back. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if this spoke to your heart. You're not alone. Your voice matters. You are enough.